Well, look, it's nice to see people from all over the world as usual. I'm in the UK. So this is we do these kind of twice a day so we can meet some people from the US as well. Although, wow, I see that we've got someone from the west of the United States. So Europe late. For most of you guys, I guess it's a lot of you guys, it's the evening. Some of you, it's the early morning, like it is here. It's nice to see. I see some familiar faces and a lot of new ones. So it's nice to see everyone here. Um, okay. I'm still trying to get us on the right view so that it records correctly. Okay. I've got too many monitors. So, um, welcome. So this is our natal chart reading tips webinar. My name is Carolina, Caro for short. I'm a professional astrologer. I have a private consultation practice, and I've been working with the Astro Butterfly School for a number of years now. So I teach courses and webinars in addition to doing private consultations. Pretty fun life being an astrologer, I have to say. I've been reading charts for a number of decades now, but to this day, I still never stop being fascinated by the depth and breadth of information that we can kind of get from one chart. But I know also how overwhelming it can be, how much information there is. So there are certain techniques to kind of learn to hone in, and we want to start talking about those today. Forgive me, I have a bit of a cough still. But so yeah, the idea here is to give you some insights about how to approach a chart. Needless to say, you will not become a chart reading expert after a 45-minute webinar or a 3-month class for that matter, but or even 10 years. It's like it's always kind of, you can learn more depth and more depth. But the idea here is to kind of give you a place to start. And hopefully you'll find something interesting here. I'm sure that we have people here who are just starting off on their astrological journey, and others of you who've probably been studying or practicing astrology for years. So the point of the webinar really is to illustrate how we can go about reading a chart and to give you a sense of what you have to consider, right? But it is this kind of endless well. So hopefully you'll finish this webinar with some ideas of where you can start, no matter what level you're at. And if you're a beginner, hopefully you won't get overwhelmed if there's things that you don't quite understand. The idea is really to give you an illustration of kind of how we start looking around. Okay, so here's our agenda. First, I'm going to start with some basic principles to keep in mind when you're approaching a natal chart. And here, really, my point is to make clear what the main building blocks of a chart are. Okay, and you'll see why that's quite important. And then from there, I'll give you some specific chart reading tips to give you ideas of where to start with interpreting that natal chart. I'll go into detail more into some of those points than the others, but the idea is really to leave you with some relatively simple, actionable tips that you can use to get some big insights. And then after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about our Astro Butterfly Wings course. That's our chart reading certification course that we're starting next week. So if you're interested in getting a better grasp on your chart reading skills, no matter what level you're really at, you should stick around and hear a little bit about that course. And I see that we actually have a few graduates of that course online today. So maybe they can answer some questions. This certification course that we starting next week, it's a 10-week course. And it's really my favorite course that we teach because we really get into the depth of chart reading and help students develop confidence in their ability to interpret charts on their own. I think a lot of us have taken shorter astrology classes, and often you're just kind of left even more overwhelmed than you were before, or you're only learning one little piece and you kind of still are left with the wondering, how do I put it all together? And so this longer course is really where we focus on that. Okay, and then finally we'll finish up with some Q&A. We've got about an hour here. I've been known to talk too much, so hopefully I'll try to keep us within the contained time limit, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, so let's get started. So first we're going to begin with those natal chart reading principles. Now, one thing I always say to clients when I'm starting a session with them is there's so much that we can look at in one astrology chart, okay? But now this is not how I would recommend looking at a chart. I've been studying and researching astrology for 30 years, and even I can't make sense of a chart when it looks like this. So no matter really what level of astrologer you are, you need to be able to remove the clutter of a chart and know how to focus on the main building blocks of the chart. This means, starting by looking at the chart using only the major planets, well, I also include Chiron. And if you're going to draw in aspect lines, really only put in the major aspects and quincunx. And, that helps us go from this to this. So this is the same chart basically with all of the other stuff removed, just with the major planets and the major aspects. Now, hopefully all of you are literate enough that you speak a little bit of glyph at least. So to orient you, we've got all the planets in the inside of the chart here, and the signs are on the outside. So here I've just showing all the major planets from, well, we call sun and moon a planet in astrology, right? Sun, moon through Pluto, right? And I've got Chiron in there as well. Now, this is a point that I really find I have to make mostly for those of you who consider yourselves more intermediate level students, because when you're a beginner, you're usually just working with the basic planets anyway. The problem is that once you get that astrology bug and you start reading more about astrology, you'll find these articles that'll start talking about asteroids or black moon Lilith or, fixed stars or the parts of fortune, and so on. And they're all really interesting astrological bodies, and I'm not saying ignore them. In fact, in our advanced course, we do go into how to read them. But I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a strong sense of that basic structural core of the chart first before you start adding in other bodies. And if you don't, it's those other bodies and points they're not only going to distract from your reading of the chart, but they're also going to have you missing the main story. So that's kind of point one. Always just start with the basics. And the thing is, like, even it's important to remember, even once you've got all of your planets in there, you have to remember that not all planets play the same role in natal interpretation. So when you're looking at a natal chart, you really want to focus in on the inner planetary placements. Those inner planets, that's Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, they're the ones that describe our psychological drives. Right? The moon describes our habitual emotional reactions. Venus is our tastes and preferences and how we value ourselves. Mars, that's how we go after what we want. So they show what our consciousness looks like, right? So these are the planets that you need to hone in on to understand a person's personality and their general style of behavior. So after Mars, you've got Jupiter and Saturn. Those are the social planets, and they're also going to describe us to some degree. But in general, the farther out the planet, the less conscious we are of the planetary drive. And when you get to outer planets, those really don't enter us through our individual consciousness in the same way. They just function differently in our chart. And that's really because of the speed at which planets travel. Jupiter spends about a year in any given sign. Saturn is about 2.5 years in every sign. So that means, almost everyone in your grade school class shared the same Jupiter and Saturn sign placements, right? But those are at least visible planets. The farther you go out, you have to remember, like, Uranus spends 7 years in a sign. Neptune is double that. Pluto, it can spend anywhere between 12 and 30 years in one sign. So looking at those planet sign placements are really not going to be describing your individual personality. But the key here is when I say placement, so when we're looking at inner planet placements, we mean we have to look at their sign and their house position, as well as the aspects that they make to other planets. So some people's personalities will indeed be very, very influenced by outer or social planets, but that's because of the aspects that they're making to inner planets. So for example, here, going back to the same chart, I've circled the inner planets, right? And we see that they have Sun and Venus, but it's opposite Uranus, right? So we know that the person's personality and life is going to be influenced by that, eccentric, individualistic planet Uranus, but that Uranian energy is coming through her Sun and Venus. It's her identity, Sun, and values, Venus, that are going to carry the Uranian flavor, right? So the fact that Uranus is in Leo isn't really describing her personality, right? So even though everyone with Uranus and Leo might share some common collective themes, in itself, Uranus and Leo is going to tell you nothing about the person's personality or behavior. The fact that it's in Leo just isn't going to matter. It's how that Uranus is hitting your inner planets that matters. Okay, so when you're reading a natal chart, you want to make sure that you're getting a really good feel for those inner planets. And in this case, they're all in different signs. She's got Mars and Sagittarius. Mercury in Capricorn. These guys are in Aquarius, Moon in Aries. And so that's 5 different inner planets, often in 5 different signs, often in 2 different signs, 3 different signs. It can vary. But so even given this focus on just inner planets, integrating the information can still be quite difficult and takes a lot of practice. Which leads me to my next point. Oh, well, this is, sorry, Ellen DeGeneres' chart. I don't know why I hadn't showed you. Surprise. She's an American comedian and talk show host. Now, yeah, but the key really to becoming a strong chart reader is getting very good at interpreting planets in signs and houses and their aspects, okay? So planets, signs, houses, and aspects are the 4 basic building blocks of a natal chart. And so becoming a good chart reader really means mastering those 4 pillars. And that's a lot of information to master. And that's why so many people get tripped up reading charts, because they haven't really fully gotten a grasp of how to put those 4 things together. Oh, and this is very important. Because as many of you know, those of you who've heard me speak before, this is one of my biggest pet peeves. I realize that when a lot of people learn the meaning of the signs and houses, it can be helpful to learn the similarities between, say, the first house in Aries or the second house in Taurus. So, often I'll hear students say, oh, Mars is in the 12th house. That's like Mars in Pisces, even though Mars is in Scorpio, right? In the 12th house. But that's the key, like Mars in Scorpio has a very different style than it does in Pisces, no matter what house it's in, because signs and houses play very different roles. So Mars in Scorpio is going to describe the style of Mars's expression. It's a Mars that needs to do things with intensity and passion, no matter what house it's in. It's going to be Mars in Scorpio. While Mars in Pisces has a much less fixed sense of what it wants. It's more changeable in style. It's a mutable sign. It's going to be softer. It's often more artistic or creative in style. And so no matter what house they're in, Mars in Pisces and Mars in Scorpio will manifest differently. Just because Mars in Scorpio is in the 12th house doesn't make it suddenly transform into a Mars in Pisces. Okay. And so what it gets down to really is that signs are styles of expression, while houses are the concrete, tangible expressions of planetary planets. The house is it's the area of life where the planet feels compelled to express its energy. But the sign placement is how a planet feels, right? And how it's in its style of expression, while the house placement tells us what a planet actually does, right? And what arena of life it tends to manifest. So here, for example, just by way of example, here we have 2 charts, and they each have what we call a stellium. That's a concentration of planets in just one sign, right? So this left one has a stellium down here. I mean, this is a big stellium. This is very, very uncommon, just so you know. This is a stellium of planets in Sagittarius, okay? And they're all in the 4th house, right? So the sign is going to give us the personal style. And this person, I mean, all of his personal planets are in Sagittarius. So this is a very Sagittarian human being. And Sagittarius is a seeking, outwardly directed sign by personality. Because it's a mutable fire sign. It's a fire sign, so it's kind of outward. It's enthusiastic. And, so this person, when you meet him, he has an animated way of speaking when he gets excited. That he might enjoy preaching about the things that he loves. I always associate the word preacher with Sagittarius for some reason, but he'll do so in the arena of the 4th house, which is the privacy of the home or the internal emotional realm. So it's not a extroverted Sagittarius, like if that Sagittarius was up here. It's one that kind of lives more in the internal world. And this is the chart of a man who really does. He loves philosophy, loves exploring spiritual topics, but he's very private and does his kind of philosophizing and spiritual exploration as a hobby. He came from a home, though, where there was tons of books and intellectual discussions, which also makes sense because the 4th house describes our background, right? But he works as a carpenter, making bespoke furniture for people's homes, right? Which is also kind of 4th housey. When people work, and you'll often see people who have a lot of 4th house emphasis working in some arena of the home or in homes. Meanwhile, on the right, we have someone with 3 planets in Cancer in the 9th house. And the reason I put this as comparison is because people often equate Sagittarius with the 9th house, and Cancer with the 4th house. So Cancer is a cardinal water sign, though. It has a very different style to Sagittarius. And so even though this person doesn't have all of his planets in Cancer, he still has a strong emphasis in Cancer. And it's a sensitive, emotional sign, right? It's emotionally protective. It can be quite guarded as well emotionally. But all those planets in this chart are in the 9th house of higher education and travel. And this is the chart of a man who's a teacher and a social worker now as well. Which is very 9th housey, the teacher part of it especially. He works with migrants and speaks multiple languages, which is also a very 9th house emphasis kind of person. He's quite social, very warm, so friendly, caring, very Cancerian qualities, so in style. But he manifests his identity and his life path in the arena of the 9th house. Okay, so that's my kind of quick and dirty explanation of the difference between signs and houses. And I highly recommend that if you still conflate them, to try to work on starting to disentangle them. It's really key to getting into higher level chart analysis. Okay, and the final point I wanted to make here, oh, where is it? I thought I had a final point. Oh, there it is. Natal charts are complex because people are complex. It seems kind of an obvious point, but I feel like you constantly read things online that's like, okay, the key to your chart, the single key to your chart, this is that, like it's going to suddenly crack who you are, right? We're complex human beings. And so that's why there's so much information of a chart, because you're different. And you know what else? You change over the course of your life. Thank goodness, right? For all of us who aren't like 20 anymore. There is this change of expression of the same planets as well. And so all of that is going to be carried through in the natal chart. I'm being blinded by the sun. 1 second. Okay, so these are kind of the basic principles, right? So first you want to make sure you strip down the chart to just the planets first, so that you can get a feel for the general structure of the chart. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now in the tips. And from there, you want to remember that it's the inner planets and the aspects to them that define our conscious personality. And then you want to remember that planets, signs, houses, and aspects are fundamentally the basic building blocks of a natal chart. If you know nothing else about how to read a chart, except can really do that well, you will be able to read a chart very well. Like that will give you 90% of your information. Okay. So even though, and then the last point, even though there's a ton of information in chart and it's often contradictory, that's because we are often contradictory human beings, right? That's why the chart displays that. So don't be like, oh, it's because I can't figure it out. It's like, no, because there really is a part of you that's quite extroverted and another part of you that likes to just snuggle at home to recharge, and both those things will be present in the chart. But yeah, in the end, the natal chart reading really, it just boils down to having a very strong understanding of those 4 pillars, the 4 building blocks of a natal chart. Okay, so that's kind of the basics. Now I'm going to get into more concrete reading tips. Okay, so one of the first things you want to do when you look at a chart is to get a feel for its overall spread and configuration. Now, again, I recommend doing this with only the planets, not with asteroids and additional things, because it's those main planets that form the backbone of the chart. And it's those planets and their relationships that really are the kind of structure of who you are. So, I mean, I find like pop astrology really likes to talk all about planets and signs. Like they really tend to emphasize signs a lot. And of course, signs are important. But the structure of the chart is defined by the relationship between planets and their distribution in the chart, in the wheel, right? So you always want to start by stepping back and reflecting on the general shape of the chart to see what insights that may bring. So there's like various questions you can ask yourself. Are most of the planets below the horizon, so below that kind of middle line, or above the horizon? Are they primarily on the eastern side or the western side, on the left side of the chart or on the right side of the chart? Are they kind of clustered in a corner? Or are they spread all around different houses? That will tell you something about a personality. Someone who's clustered tends to have a very hyper focus. Someone who's spread is their attention and consciousness is spread around. Remember planets, especially the inner planets, are our consciousness. So even when I'm looking at the structure of the chart, often I'll look at all of the charts and then I'll really hone in on, but where are the inner planets? Because that's really going to tell you where the person thinks a lot, right? How they perceive things, how they think of themselves and the world. I think I have another one. Oh, this is a really important one too. Is there a particularly strong elemental or modality emphasis? If you don't know what those words mean, those are two ways that we categorize signs. Okay, every sign has one modality and one element. And that's what defines the quality of the sign. And some people, for example, are all earth, or 80% earth. Some people are, missing water, which just means that they'll get flooded by emotions rather than kind of having a better grasp and understanding of how the emotions functions. That emotions will just kind of flood over them because none of their planets are in a water sign, which is related to emotions. So this is a very important one. And then another one that I always pay attention to is, are there any outlier planets? And I'll show you an example of that. Sometimes you'll get like a cluster and then like one little planet standing somewhere else. Ooh, if something stands out in the chart and like your attention keeps going to it, there's a reason. Like that ends up having a very strong emphasis in the chart. So I think that's it. Yeah. So really, as you start honing in on your understanding of signs and houses and the difference between them, you'll learn to get a feel for the chart by stepping back and looking at it as a whole. But I'll give a few examples here. Okay, so this is like just by way of example. Obviously, don't have time to get into detail to get into all the differences between the hemispheres and the quadrants, but it is one way that we very commonly divide up a chart. It's to focus on the different quadrants and the hemispheres. So I'm just going to give you a few example charts so you can get a feel for how different charts have different vibes. Okay, so let's start by thinking about this north-south division. The top part of the chart is actually the southern hemisphere. And the top part of the chart is the more public side of the chart. It shows planets that were above the horizon when you were born, so they're up there, right? They're here to be seen. So when you see a chart with all its planets up at the top, this generally indicates a more extroverted personality, even when it's signs that aren't traditionally as extroverted. Just because they're up there, they're just kind of used to having to be out there. And often, like if it is kind of more shy style of signs, but they're all up there, sometimes the person feels uncomfortable about that attention, but yet they're still driven to kind of be in that more public role, and they kind of are oriented in that direction. People, often they look to the external world for more recognition, right? They're just more ready to be seen. And meanwhile, a chart that has all its planets spread across the bottom shows a personality that seeks privacy, right? And fulfillment through kind of personal activities rather than that outside interaction with the outside world. And I just, when I was preparing this, I was like, okay, let me think of someone who's like very private. And for whatever reason, the first person that came to my mind was Barbra Streisand. I remember reading once an article about how she hated all attention and things like that. And I was like, oh, I wonder what her chart looks like. And sure enough, almost all of her planets are in the bottom of the chart in that private sector, right? She's like notoriously private. And of course, she's a singer. She's a very famous person and an actor. So just because the person doesn't have planets up here at the top or in the 10th house, obviously doesn't mean that the person won't receive any public recognition. It just means that from her perspective, her source of gratification and personal orientation is drawn towards that private sphere. People ask me that all the time, like, oh no, I have no planets in the 7th house. Does that mean I won't have a relationship? No. It just means that that's not where like the drama of your consciousness is kind of unfolding. Remember, planets are about consciousness and where our attention lies. Okay, and in this chart here, we see a lot of planets up at the top of the chart as well. But what's most notable is that almost all the planets are on the east side of the chart, or the left side of the chart, right? And the east-west division is about how we seek personal growth, right? So people who have their planets all on the east side or the left side of the chart need to kind of pave their own way. They tend to be highly independent self-starters who create their circumstances. And they're just much more me focused as well. Here's someone with a strong Eastern Hemisphere emphasis as well. I didn't realize I put two of those. So yeah, those are the east ones. Whereas people with planets, all the planets on the right side of the chart, they tend to grow and move through life in a more responsive manner. It's more kind of like in response to their circumstances, or they often look more towards others to understand themselves. So it's not like these people are sheep and these people are leaders, or these people are selfish and these people are pushovers. It's not that simple. And this is why actually it can be quite hard to come up with examples, because the person internally kind of gets it. If you have one of these charts, it's like that you kind of find yourself always oriented through the other direction if you're on the west, or you just kind of feel like you always got to kind of be creating my new thing if you're on the east. So it's more of an internal sense, okay, rather than something that's quickly and easily observable from the person. And sometimes, you get charts that are super concentrated in just one quadrant, okay? And again, here I can't discuss, we don't have time to get into the details of each of those, but Leonardo DiCaprio, for example, has almost all his planets smushed into that first quadrant. And this is the quadrant that's really focused around describing the person as a unique individual. So what makes them before they go out and interact with the rest of the world. So someone like this with most of their planets in the first is going to see everything through the lens of their personal experiences. It doesn't mean necessarily that, again, that they're selfish, but the way they interpret the world, come to decisions, and interact with the world is driven by their own personal perspective and preferences. Whereas someone who has them all in this quadrant, in the top, the opposite one, for example, their decisions and movements will be so much more centered and focused around the response from another or the other. And mind you, sometimes you'll have a chart that has no single area of concentration, right? That's not uncommon. It's more, I mean, it's slightly rare to see one with planets spread out around the chart this evenly with a number of planets in all four quadrants. This is actually my chart. It's what we call a splash chart. And it describes someone whose default style is to look at the world from lots of different angles, right? So just as we would expect. So again, like just kind of sitting back and looking at it, you have a lot of times you'll get an intuitive sense of it. And this is all, again, like not even paying attention to signs. It's just looking at the structure of the chart, right? So it's like you get a sense of like, oh, okay, it's very like all over the place. That says something about the person's personality and perspective. So often it'll be that kind of a jack of all trades type personality more. And this is an example of a chart that I was saying, like with a single outlier planet. So and again, it's something that the more you look at charts, the more you start to identify. So this is actually the node. This isn't a planet. So when we're looking at the backbone of the chart, the structure chart, we're not looking at the nodes. So this guy is kind of in the corner, and they have Chiron here on the angle. But aside from that, in terms of the major planets, they're all kind of clustered up here, and then there's one that's kind of sitting on its own, right? So this is Jupiter. So Jupiter's sitting down there opposite all her other planets, and so there you really know that you have to pay attention to the archetype of that outlier planet. And indeed, this is the chart of someone whose life has been very strongly defined by her belief systems. And specifically, it's Jupiter in Capricorn. So it's finding leadership in belief systems. And it's a huge value of hers. And it's just really ended up driving her life in many ways, but also kind of where her attention lies, her personal experience of it. And again, even if we just observed her from the outside, she has a different job, it's described by Virgo and things like that. But from her personal experience, Jupiter is by far the most important archetype in her life. That's how she experiences the world. And that's because it's kind of sitting there on its own. It's also her chart ruler. So it's a very defined planet. Okay. Next tip. Focus in on angular planets, okay? And I'm going to go in, this is like the last point I'm going to go into a lot of detail about, but no matter what house system you use, the angles, that means the ascendant, the descendant, the midheaven, and the IC, they're the single most sensitive points of a chart, of any chart, Okay. And so even if you're using whole sign houses, for example, you'll still find those angles somewhere floating around in one of the houses. Those angles, whenever you have a planet that's conjunct an angle, meaning it's within 10 degrees of that angle, that planet is going to influence every aspect of your life, not only the house it sits in. Okay. It's going to be a core driver shaping your personality and life path. And this is something that's really too often overlooked. Okay, like people you don't read that much about this, and it's really one of the most important things about chart reading. First, I look at the structure of the chart, and then the next thing I do always is see what's angular. Like, okay, because that's going to really give you such a flavor for the person's personality. Like, for example, here, I mentioned this is my chart. I've got Mercury sitting right on the midheaven in Aquarius. And, it's like exploring ideas, kind of getting to the bottom of stuff. That mercurial drive is absolutely central to how I'm seen, how I'm perceived in general, but also how I think of myself. So here's an example. This chart has Saturn in Scorpio conjunct the midheaven. Okay, so Saturn is in Scorpio. Scorpio is a fixed sign. And actually, if we go back to Ellen DeGeneres' chart, we see that she also has Saturn conjunct the midheaven, but hers is in Sagittarius. So her Saturn is in a changeable, kind of more vibrant sign. Sagittarius is a fire sign. Whereas, this one is a Saturn that's more intense. It's more rigid in energy. Okay, it's going to value tradition, right? It's going to look to maintain control even through periods of intense turmoil. And, in both this chart and Ellen's, we know that Saturn, which is the planet of discipline and responsibility, is going to be a very strong part of their personalities. But, so here, even though it's kind of in a more like fun sign, Saturn, it's in Sagittarius, we still know that she's going to be a very hard worker, very committed and serious about what she does. That Saturnian tone, because it's on the angle, is going to very much kind of shape the way that she goes about her work. And why don't I? Oh my goodness. Oh, it's Queen Elizabeth's chart. I don't know. Many of you probably have seen this one before. And you really sense that kind of Saturn and Scorpio at the top of her chart, kind of holding together the empire for all those for all those decades, right? And also she has the North Node in Cancer on her descendant, which really speaks to kind of a more faded relationship to the homeland and how important that Cancer North Node, like, and kind of like learning, her life really being dedicated towards learning that archetype. Okay, let's look at a few others. This is Prince. He has his Pluto conjunct his Leo midheaven and Moon conjunct his IC in Pisces. Prince is, I mean, just look at him. He just really exemplifies that Pluto archetype, right? His music and his persona always had this Plutonic vibe of like, sexy, slightly secretive, dark in some way. It really also tries to get to the core and the essence of things. So, and it's funny because later in his career, Prince actually changed his name and replaced it with a symbol, which is a great example of how Pluto on the midheaven could operate. Pluto is not, it's kind of about being a little bit hidden and not completely up in your face, right? And on the other hand, the moon conjunct the Pisces IC gave Prince that really strong talent and artistic sensitivity, because Moon Pisces is going to have that quality of being very artistic and sensitive. Let's see. Here we have Kurt Cobain. He has Uranus and Pluto on the ascendant. So again, there's going to be that Pluto vibe, but this time it's with Uranus, which is the planet of freedom and revolution. And Kurt Cobain's kind of life direction, which is our ascendant, was very much defined by that kind of revolution, the revolution of music. I mean, he was pretty much started the grunge music revolution in the early 90s and became this very cult-like figure. Here we have Angelina Jolie. She's a classic one that we see a lot with a person with a Venus on the ascendant, right? obviously she's been, known for her beauty and voted one of the most beautiful women of all time. She also has Jupiter and Moon and Mars conjunct her midheaven. So we can interpret that lots of different ways. A classic definition of Moon, the planet of mothering and nurturing, with Jupiter is abundance of children, and she's very much known for that. But also as a personality feature, we know that her inner world, Moon, and her energy, Mars and Jupiter, the planet of expression, they're all in Aries, which is this impulsive, fiery sign. So we'd expect her to be known, right, perhaps for being kind of brash, impulsive, maybe temperamental, and kind of like that kind of more Aries, independent spirit is going to be very visible to somebody, to the world, really, because it's up on her midheaven. Oh, and this is a test. So Sigmund Freud, what planets do you think he might have on an angle? Participation time.
Pluto.
Sorry?
Pluto.
Pluto, yeah. Why?
Why? Because he was very well known for the exploration of the unconscious world inside the people.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's dependent, but I think that Pluto is dominant in this chart, in his chart.
Yeah, yeah. Any other ideas?
Yeah, I was thinking Pluto too, and maybe it's Pluto on the descendant because he was analyzing other people. Like
Yeah.
he was able to look into someone else.
The focus was on the other, right? Gathering knowledge
Yeah.
through the other. Yeah, I see. And yeah, we've got a couple votes there for Mercury because he shaped how we think. Yeah, Mercury. And it's interesting. I mean, it could be, and it's more, and I think the angular ones often we want to think about it from the perspective of the person themselves, like how, so a Mercury person will always be looking at multiple ideas. Like again, I'm a classic Mercury people. Like I can't make a point with just one example. I have to have 7. Like there's the multiplicity factor of it. And so usually people who are very mercurial will have that quality to some degree. But I agree, there's also something about just kind of like the curiosity that you imagine that Freud might have had. And we see Uranus as well as someone mentioned Uranus. Uranus is the planet of revolution. So often people who kind of like jump a discipline into a new direction have a prominent Uranus, kind of like how we saw Kurt Cobain with Uranus there as well, right? Kind of, there's often something there that we see. Okay, well, great guesses. Saturn could be Saturn if he just worked really hard. I actually don't know enough about his working habits. That's quick. People with a Saturn that's angular usually have a sense of deep responsibility and like duty and kind of having to kind of persevere. They usually have a slightly stern way of being. I mean, it's interesting because I showed Ellen DeGeneres, who's like known for being a comedian. Yet she's quite structured in her way, and she does have Mars there, so that kind of shapes a little bit. People who have like just Saturn often have a more stern quality to them. So here it is. Ta-da-da. Indeed, there is Pluto there on the descendant, and his sun is with Uranus actually on the conjuncted descendant. So we see all 3 of these really being quite dominant, and and bonus points for the person who identified the angle correctly. So again, almost all of his planets on that hemisphere, right? So more others focused, right? Kind of really trying to understand things and get to the bottom of things through the experience of the other, right? That's makes a lot of sense. Okay. Now, the next tip, and these I'm just going to kind of fly through more because I can't go into so much detail, but this is very similar to the focus on angular planets, but I've found that I almost always look for the most elevated planet. So often this will be conjunct the midheaven, depending on what hemisphere or like when the person was born and where, what latitudes and stuff. But it's whatever's at the top of the chart. I always talk about this. What's at the top of the person's chart? So just by way of example, here we have Mars at the top of the chart. Mars in Libra, it's the most elevated planet. It's at so the most elevated point is what's called the zenith. This is not the same as the midheaven. Okay, it's the point that's 90 degrees from the ascendant. No matter which house system you use, the zenith is going to be that top point. And it tends to be very representative of how the person comes off, like kind of their general demeanor, but as well as how they tend to self-identify. So even though, planets conjunct the midheaven will as well, that tends to be more specific to their vocation, like where they see they want to go. Whereas this is kind of like a more general demeanor, I find. It's kind of like, it's a planet that we, for some reason, have on a pedestal. That's how I have come to think about it. This is, I don't know how many of you know Sam Harris, probably not that many. I'm just obsessed with studying his astrological chart because he does not believe in astrology. Let me tell you that. He's very loudmouth. He's a public intellectual in the US, and he's known for a few things now, but he's got, the fighter planet in the air sign of Libra in the 9th house. And if you ever hear him speak, he's incredibly intelligent, incredibly knowledgeable, and specializes in having public debates, which is very like back and forth Libra style, right? But very well educated, like that, and that has that 9th house feeling. But he himself, I imagine, sees himself as this like very objective, clear-minded thinker, which is very Libra air sign, but he's slightly aggressive about it, to say the least. And so, and every chart, well, we'll have a most elevated planet. Of course, someone like Barbara Streisand doesn't have one that really kind of is up there. But sometimes the most elevated planet will be over here, because if the person doesn't have it there. But remember, because this is the most public place in our chart, the most kind of visible place, it's important in everybody's chart if you have anything kind of more or less in that zone. Okay, and these last 2 points I'm not going to get into, but this is about aspects. I can't emphasize enough the importance of aspects. I love aspects. Often it's the tightest aspect, so the tightest in degree, but I always hone in, no matter what chart I'm looking at, what's the strongest tense aspect. So square, opposition. And often you'll see them in an aspect pattern. And this is going to indicate kind of what fuels the person. A lot of times it's what gets them moving. And you'll find that a lot of their life is driven by the tension between those two archetypes. And then finally, the most harmonious aspect. We can often think about this as a secret talent. And this one can be really interesting because sometimes people aren't even aware of it. And by the harmonious aspect, we're talking about trines and sextiles generally, although, certainly conjunctions can count as a tense aspect or a harmonious aspect, depending on the planets involved. But the most harmonious aspect, especially if it's in an aspect pattern, this is somewhere you can bring someone's attention to and be like, okay, this is something that you're really good at. That really comes quite easily to you. People often take for granted that this is something that they just have a knack for. Okay. Okay, and so that's kind of the general tips that I have. And moving on to I just want to quickly present the course that we do. This is it's called the Astro Butterfly Wings. And this basically, everything that I covered here and much more detail is the stuff that we go in the natal chart reading course. There are 2 tracks for it. So you kind of register in one or the other. And this is, there's the beginner and intermediate students, and then kind of upper intermediate and advanced. And really, the key about knowing which one you belong to is what I was talking about there in terms of the basics, knowing the basics of a chart. The beginner one, and then this is one that we recommend for beginners and intermediate students. Here we're going to cover the 4 pillars of the chart that we talked about: planet signs, houses, and aspects, in really great detail. So a lot of people think that they already know this information, or think, whatever, I can just look it up and descriptions on the internet. But we cover the material quite differently in our course. So for example, like in the module where we cover the houses, we don't just go through each house and give you a description. I mean, we do that too, but we have multiple lessons that'll help you think about the differences between the houses from different angles, which helps you to really start to internalize the meaning of the houses so that you finish with a much deeper sense of how the houses operate. Because really the aim of this track, the track 1 in general, is to leave you feeling confident in your own understanding of those 4 pillars so that you can, feel a sense of mastery of your understanding of planetary placements. You don't have to look everything up. And then in the second half of that course, actually, once you have those basics more established, we go deeper into chart interpretation. So, module 6, I think, focuses on aspect patterns, then on delineations, kind of going more in detail on specific placements. 8 and 9 go into transits and progressions. These are techniques that are predictive techniques, but really they're really important to use, and they really can help you understand how different parts of the natal chart are activated at different periods of your life. This is something very important about the natal chart. Remember, we have all these different planets in different places. At different moments in your life, some are kind of being spotlit while others aren't. And that explains a lot of your life experiences. So we cover that in this course as well. And then, and also like different types of readings, like how would you approach a chart if you want to know more about relationships? How would you approach if you want to know about career? So that kind of stuff. So it's a really very comprehensive course that's quite interesting. Thank you, guys. And then there's the more advanced module. So if you feel confident in your ability to interpret, Venus and Scorpio in the second house, conjunct Moon and square Uranus, then you're ready for the upper, intermediate, and advanced module, because that's kind of the starting point. If you're not that clear on the difference between houses, signs, and aspects, or you consistently rely on cookbook descriptions to interpret those placements, then we'd recommend you start with track 1, and then you move on to track 2 in a few months. After you finish track 1, we'll offer track 2 again for graduates of track 1, probably in January. And in track 2, we're building on that basic knowledge and going deeper into techniques to understand that big picture of the chart. So, that thing I described before about stepping back and trying to take in the whole chart, right? We go into detail about how to do that. And then we move on to more advanced techniques like essential dignities, house rulerships, dispositors, asteroids, fixed stars, a lot of that kind of detail. And really to me, the kind of bread and butter of astrologies are the predictive techniques. And so in the advanced course, we go more in depth into all of the different major predictive techniques: transits, progressions, solar arc directions, solar returns, and annual perfections. It's a lot, but it's really a great course, if I say so myself. So I think one of the things that really sets apart our courses is that you have these video lessons online, lots of chart examples. There's also quizzes. There's kind of assignments. There's weekly assignments, which you get email feedback. You get direct feedback from a tutor who can read your homework assignments to help you kind of, move yourself forward, catch errors that you're making. We do weekly Q&A calls. So I do those. I do the weekly Q&A calls for both tracks, and I'm a tutor for the advanced students. We do practice workshops that are run by Caroline, and then we have more individual tutors for the beginners. So lots of one-on-one feedback, which I think really sets apart our course from most online courses. And, okay, I'm done talking. So yeah, if you're interested, you want to check your emails when you get course registration links. But now I want to answer any questions that you have about anything that I presented or anything about the course, or if anyone has if we have any graduates of the course, people want to share anything, you're welcome to as well, or any other thoughts about the chart reading tips, things I can answer for you. So we got one question here. The only thing holding me back from enrolling in the chart reading course is that I've always used whole signs. Oh, I love this question. Great. I've always used whole signs and I've never worked with Placidus houses, and I'm afraid of being lost. Do you think that could be a problem? So we actually teach the course using both house systems, both whole signs and Placidus, because Angelina Astro Butterfly, who uses both of them all the time, I constantly am switching back and forth. So though we do a lot of examples in Placidus, some of the examples are also in whole sign houses, and part of it is kind of learning to get a feel for the two. And so I don't think that you'll be lost just because you've never worked with Placidus. The ideas and the concepts are still the same. Oops. Yeah, there will be a recording of this call, and it'll be sent out to you if you registered for the call. And then there is another one at 5 p.m. UK time later today. But yeah, to register, you have to kind of go back into those emails and do that. So what's the difference between the two courses or the two calls? The two calls today, they're the same. One is for people in Australasia more so, and one is for Americans more so, although we've gotten some instruments. So no, you guys were my first run. So the second one, I'll be so clear. I'll be crystal clear, never crystal clear. But it's the same presentation. So I don't recommend you come back unless you really can't get enough of me. How many times a year do you offer the course? So the beginners one, we just offer, so we're offering both right now at the start of the year, but we will offer the advanced course for the beginner graduates again at the start of next year. So in January or February, I'm not sure exactly when. So the advanced gets offered twice, but the beginners, I believe, will only be offered in September. If someone has planets at the top of the chart and have more than, sorry, I can stop sharing so that you can see my beautiful face. Okay. If someone has planets at the top of the chart and have more than one, which one is the determining one of the top of the chart? Yeah, I mean, again, so it's kind of like if you have two planets conjunct an angle, well, they both matter, right? So we saw Freud's chart that he's defined both by the Pluto and the Uranus and the Sun, where he's kind of like, his ego might have been a part of it as well. So same thing with top of the chart. The most exact one would be the one that's exactly 90 degrees, so the same degree to the ascendant. Okay, so if you have a 14-degree ascendant, the top, it's the one that's at 14, closest to 14 degrees, and in a square sign, right? Oh, nice. Yeah, I know we have a few beginner graduates here, so you guys will be in the track 2 this year. Looking forward to it. So yeah, Marion, we will offer the beginner course again next year, certainly in September, if not before. Oh, what's the difference between the two house systems? Oh, okay, yes, that wasn't one of my options. So there was actually an email that Angelina, the Astro Butterfly, sent out earlier this week that was really interesting on that. So I highly recommend that you take a look at that one. It's really about how you divide up the houses. They all will have the same angles, but they're marked differently. In Placidus, those angles are the start of houses, whereas in whole sign, the angles kind of float in houses. It's a little bit different. But the idea of reading them and the meaning of houses are still the same. That's why you can learn chart interpretation using whichever house system you want. How much emphasis do you give the chart ruler in your readings? A lot. And I took it out of this presentation because of time, but I consider it a personal planet. So when I said like you really want to focus on your inner planets, really I should have said inner planets and your chart ruler. I think it's incredibly important. We talk a lot about that in the course as well. Cost of the courses. Libby, I don't know the cost of the courses. Seems like a good question that I should have known the answer to. You have to click on if you click on the emails where it gives you the registration link, it'll tell you there the cost. It's not like you automatically buy it without looking. Is the advanced a new course? And is there a discount if you're an AOA member or have already taken the beginners? Yeah, there's definitely a discount for AOA members. It's 20% discount. It's not a new course. We taught it last year, the advanced track. It's the Wings Pro is what it's called. Our workshop's going to be on Tuesday for Astro Butterfly Wings and Pro and Q&A on Sunday. Yes. Yes, they are. So yeah, I'll be doing the Q&As on Sundays, and the kind of more experiential workshops are on Tuesdays, and the new material comes out on Wednesday every week. That's kind of the structure of the course. I'm enrolled on the track 2 course. However, I think that it would be good to review the last part of track 1. Is it feasible? Not sure. You should email the info at Astro Butterfly, and she'll be able to tell you. If you already did track 1, and that's another thing. Oh, with these courses, you have lifetime access to all the material. I think that's something else that's really great about our courses. So you do it once and you can kind of go back and still look. So if you already did track 1, then you would have access to it before so you can review to track 2. 90 degrees is stronger than the planet conjunct the midheaven. No, it's just different. Is it stronger? No, I think that the angles really are this incredibly sensitive point. And they just, it's kind of like the angles, I always think of them as kind of like the doorway through which we manifest into this world in some way, like, so they're very earthly, right? They're very determined by your specific moment of birth. And so anything that's conjunct those, it's just going to make that planet dominant, no matter really which angle. Okay. The elevated planet it's not more important, it's not less important, it's just something else that's quite important, that's very defining, featurey. So I always look at it as, especially if someone doesn't have conjunctions to the midheaven, or if they have both. Like I said, you'll, like, for example, the Sam Harris one that I showed, he has Mars and Libra, the most elevated, and that's very much his style of kind of discourse, Mars and Libra. But he also had Neptune conjunct his midheaven, and one of the things that he's known for is like a meditation app and explorations into the kind of Neptunian realm. So both define him. Again, this gets to one of those principles of, there's more than one thing that defines and characterizes us. Like, if you had to kind of prioritize descriptions of yourself, would it be that easy? I mean, some people, would have like really strong stellium, but like most of us, kind of depends on the situation, catch me on the day, in what area of my life, I'm gonna have different parts of me that come up and that are more dominant, right? Sam says that it's $790, the course. Who runs Astro Butterfly? So we're a team, the Astro Butterfly School. So I'm one of the primary teachers, but the person who writes all the emails, her name is Angelina. She also runs, and it's her company, and she runs AOA, as the Age of Aquarius as well. Great astrologer. In a stellium, what's the most important planet? What planet runs the stellium? Interesting question. We do go over that in the course, and it's up for debate. I mean, it depends on kind of what do you mean by the most important, how you're looking at it. Oftentimes we'll think about the center one, the planet in the middle of the stellium, but it kind of depends also which ones are tightest, which planets are at play. So I don't think there's a very simple answer to that. The one thing about the stellium is that it just really implies a concentration of energy in that house, in that sign. I've done the beginners and would like to do the pro, but I'm not sure I'm ready. Is there an option to review the beginners at a discount? Or if the pro is too advanced, can you pause and pick up next year? Yeah, so if you've done the beginners, you will still have access to all of that material. And so you can absolutely review it and then look into it. So I'm not very well informed about the discounts that are available. I think there is a discount if you did the beginners when you register to the pro, but again, email Angelina. So that's info@astrobutterfly.com. Yes, the costs are in US dollars. What else? Okay. Which of this? Okay, great. I think I answered all your questions. Any other questions? And you're welcome to unmute yourself as well. Okay. Oh my God, I've never been so punctual. I'm so impressed. Good job, Carolina. No, any other questions? Yeah, feel free. You're welcome to email me. I'm at carolina@ageofaquarius.com or Astro Butterfly. So I'll put those into the chat also so you can get more information. And of course, in the emails that you all receive, that's where you get the links and stuff to get more information. So that's her. I can be emailed at there. Okay. So that's that. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for joining me. Bye.